Hello and welcome to the Being Human podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Bottaro. Today I've got an awesome guest. I love talking to this woman. She is brilliant. She has a great heart. She's a great mom. And she's sometimes on different conferences, places I've spoken. We've chatted before. And she's doing incredible work, an incredible ministry that she has. She is Noelle Mering with the Theology of Home, if you're familiar with that, and she co-runs that with Carrie Gress, and she's got some amazing things that she's been working on. She's really got her finger on the pulse of sort of what's going on here. But officially, she is a Catholic theologian, an author, a public speaker. She's known for incisive cultural commentary and she's able to navigate between sort of what's really going on in the world. She's from California. No shade to California, but there's a lot you can have your finger on the pulse of with living in California, but also upholding really traditional Catholic values. She's a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and as I said, she co-directs a Theology of Home project with Carrie Gress. She had a really great book come out a while ago called Awake, Not Woke. So it's just talking about the culture of wokeism. And she's working on a new book right now that we dig into a little bit more. And there's this recent trend in judging family members as toxic. And I can't tell you how many parents and grandparents I've spoken with who are just heartbroken at the ways in which kids are now being led to write off their parents and really end relationships with this kind of toxic approach, or toxic judgment. And so this no contact movement, which is well underway, Noelle's writing on that now, and so we talk a lot about that and kind of break that open. So this was a fun conversation for me. It was a blessing for me, and I pray also that it will be a blessing for you. Enjoy. I spent the last 10 years learning how to help people using the best techniques available in psychology integrated with the Catholic faith. Now we've figured out that there's a better way to help people than just slapping a Catholic label on the same secular model of therapy you find anywhere else. The real question is, how will we make this shift to a new model of truly Catholic accompaniment, keeping the psychological sciences in mind while opening up to a more human and more effective approach? This podcast is here to give you the answer. Join me and follow along as I take you behind the scenes of what this new model looks like, using recorded audio from sessions working with my team, with colleagues, and even directly with clients. My name is Dr. Greg Bottaro, and I want to welcome you to the Being Human podcast. All right, Noelle, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is so great. So you're the other end of the country, so we're separated by some time zones here, but able to make it work here.
The magic of technology.
That's right. I love this. What's it like in California right now? What's the environmental pulse? You've
Well, we
had
just got
recently the
over
fires.
the fires, yep, and now we've had some rain last week. We've got more rain coming this week. So then the concern becomes the mudslides, but the rain is
Oh yeah.
always welcome.
What's it like culturally? I've been thinking a lot about, your first book, Awake Not Woke. This whole idea of wokeness, and then all this Trump stuff about the end of woke and woke is dead, or I forget whatever his phrase was. And I always think of California as like the seedbed and hotbed of like all of that sort of front end of the progressive things. So what's it feel like to be in California right now?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I think things always seem more alarming from afar. And so, once you're
Okay.
in it, you don't really notice maybe the extremities so much. But we're also very blessed and fortunate to be in a big Catholic community. We're near Thomas Aquinas College, so there's
Hmm.
just a huge community that's sprung up around this area because of that school. And then we have a lot of friends in Pasadena, and they were hit a lot by the fires, Altadena in particular. But
Hmm.
they have a great Catholic community down there too. So there's these pockets of really vibrant, faithful people.
Mm.
And in some ways, I think maybe they are more aware, sort of the dynamics of ideology at play because we are in California, and so they tend to be sort of, I guess, more fervently, attuned to kind of what certain types of manipulations that might be at play and how to counter them. So yeah, I think in some ways it might be a less woke environment than I might have anywhere else in the country.
So yeah, more training is sort of more front of mind, and a lot more. It sounds like better formation even in dealing sort of with those conversations.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, both how to navigate them, with prudence and charity, but also, a real kind of spirit to, actually navigate those well and be in the conversation.
Are we've had some conversations at conferences the last time we saw you at FUS, and we started talking about raising kids a little bit and different dynamics of raising kids. I'm curious if you must think really intentionally about, I mean, knowing you, I know you must think really intentionally about how these how these ideas and ideologies uh, affect formation of children. Do you
Yeah.
find in your travels, do you think because you're exposed to these ideologies there more so maybe than other places, does that enter more into sort of the way that you're thinking about educating children?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so besides Awake Not Woke, the other book projects have been Theology of Home book series.
Right.
And those are kind of two sides of one coin in a way, in one project, the Theology of Home project, we're really trying to put forward positive visions of a flourishing family life that you can see and is embodied because we've had so many of our models of, womanhood and manhood be either too shallow or or not really reflective of sort of what the on the ground experience of being a parent who wants to have a good marriage, wants to have a good family life, and really
Mm.
wants to thrive. Instead, we kind of get cartoon images of what family life or manhood and womanhood look like. Um, so yeah, I think that my experience talking to people over the last few years around the country is that there's a whole host of really good parents who have seen their kids fall away from the faith, who have seen their kids get captured by woke ideology, and it's caused a lot of division in their family. So, yeah, I've thought a lot about, and at some point we'll probably write a book about how an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Like, how can we reach the parents with the small kids and car
Yes.
seats and trying to figure out where to go to school, and sort of say, okay, this has been a problem, and how do you strengthen your own family life now so that you won't be facing sort of this heartache that I think is just rampant around the country with very good, well-intentioned parents who just kind of their kids just got kind of captured by the culture. And I think there are a lot of things that we can do. Even simple things. I mean, I always talk about like cheerfulness in the home, having inside jokes with each other. I mean, things that your
Mm.
affection that really bonds you. It's like the faith is not really passed on through propositions and, strict rules so much as it is also passed on through warmth and affection and
Yeah.
communicating the dignity and the goodness of the other person. And I think that is oftentimes through things like affection, humor, fun. So little things like that. I mean, technology is another huge thing. A lot of kids get really sucked into, I mean, not to even setting aside like the porn issue. There's just so much ideology on platforms. Tumblr was a huge avenue for a lot of the gender confusion. And now, there's all sorts of TikToks and, YouTubes that are channels that corners the internet you can find that will really sow sort of suspicion against your parents, put a wedge in between families. So, yeah, there's a lot out there.
Yeah, that's actually I want to get into that too. We're talking about no contact and separating out relationships and that idea, but I guess yeah, to get a little so it's just interesting. People usually want the clickbaity, like give me the 5 tips that, how to have the conversations, or what age do I need to start talking about trans ideology, or how do I deal with the kids at school, and you realize, okay, you could give that answer. But then if there's not cheerfulness in the home, if there's not unity in the home, if there's not the inside jokes and all the little rituals and those other beautiful things, it doesn't matter really
Yeah,
if you know how to have a certain conversation or when to have the conversation. So I think that's such an important point, and that's why I love theology of the home. You really unpack that really beautifully. It's like the most important things about family life, and I think, well, it's unfortunate, but it's just human psychology, the way that we work. We don't know how to value real priorities, and so we're usually attracted to the very superficial things.
that's
You know,
right.
so it's like a lot of parents are just wondering, like, okay, so when do I talk to my kids about transgender ideology? Like, do you tell your kid in the car seat that some boys think they're girls,
Not in the car
or do you
seat.
wait till there's an actual situation, an actual experience, or how do you actually navigate that on the superficial level?
Yeah, yeah. We've tried to do it just fairly organically and also trying to glean wisdom from older parents who have, been on the road longer, a few steps ahead of us. So our kids are at classical Catholic school where they don't have, most kids don't even have smartphones. So they're in a very kind of safe, environment, I guess. But they still find out things. It
Mm,
is not, it is, your kids just pick up things in the culture. So I think they learned what a lot LGBTQ was before we told them. And so then we've sort of, in some ways, kind of just kept conversations open. And
mm,
so it felt sort of organic to each child when it was ready to talk to them about different things. I think maybe around 12 is normally when we have bigger talks about, where babies come from, or it might be 10 to 12, somewhere in there. And I'm not exactly sure if that is the perfect age, but that's just what's worked within our family.
mhm,
So yeah, I mean, I think uh, you're so right about we always want sort of a superficial or an answer or the clickbaity stuff, but I have found, and I'm sure you've found too, that the best things that kind of really cement formation into our kids is us living them deeply ourselves, right?
mm.
And so there's really not a performative. I've learned that so many times. I think we're so trained to want a shortcut or a quick fix, and it really is just us doing our own, hard, quiet, hidden work of prayer and devotion to that time, that I think emanates out from all of us. And it's such a obvious answer, but it really is, the hard answer of, kids. I think they see you in the intimacy of your home life, and it's horrifying and beautiful. It's horrifying because you see your mistakes and your faults mirrored in people who you don't want to see your faults and mistakes mirrored through. But then it's beautiful because you get to contend with those mistakes, and you really get to grow and see the humility that's born out of someone knowing you really well,
Mm,
and being able to struggle. And then you're giving your kids an example of what that struggle looks like. What does the faith really look like in the intimacy of a home life?
mm.
So it's really the best thing to do. It's just that living from the hidden out, and we tend to want to live from the outward in, and give short shrift to our inner life. But the interior life of
Yes.
prayer is really the key.
There's so many times that people call in and they want services for their kids. It's like they don't have the answer for how to fix this problem, so then they want to send their kids to us to fix that problem.
Mm.
And we actually stopped doing therapy with kids, not because there's not an important place for that, and there really is for some kids in certain situations, but 9 times out of 10, the most important thing that needed to happen was some change on the level of the parent and what they're modeling and the example they're setting and what's happening in the home. And we shifted over to saying we're going to start doing instead parent consultation, parent work instead. Like that's going to be the best way to cause the greatest effect of change in the home. And not as many parents want to sign up for that. We
Right.
probably lost at least half the people that thought they were coming to us for help for their kids. And but at the end of the day, it's better help
Yes.
because we're striking at the heart of where there might be need for things to change. And it's like, and before we get to that step, we have to realize uh, we're all in this together. Like we're all making mistakes, we're all imperfect, we're all suffering our wounds. We all need to learn from others. I love that you said you reach out to the parents who've been around a little longer, the parents with the older kids than what you have. It's always a beautiful opportunity to learn, to grow. This is how God built us. We're supposed to be a society of community that we learn from each other along the way. So those are the things that are more important. It's like we're not the type of being in which the important things can be summed up in a blog article
Yeah.
that give you age ranges and top 5 things to do whatever. Like, we need real relationship, we need real community. So I think that's really important to see that. And that it kind of bridges into something else we were talking about in terms of separating from relationships. And I think it's all very related to everything else that you've been doing, and seems like a natural progression to next think about this extreme amplification of dehumanization in this whole movement of these no contact situations. So speak into that a little bit. Tell me what you're working on, and
Yeah.
how that connects.
Yeah, so I just started working on a new book. It will be called, tentative title, No Contact, Understanding and Overcoming the Politics of Estrangement. And it was really born out of both Theology of Home and Awake Not Woke. But that experience I referenced of going around the country and hearing from all of these heartbroken parents about the division within their families, oftentimes they're navigating some level of estrangement. And it's such a hard thing because I'm only hearing one side, obviously. So I don't know, maybe the children would present a different perspective to me. But it does seem like there's been a shift, and it's enough of a shift that it's been written about in New York Times, New Yorker, Vox, Time Magazine, all sorts of places saying, why is there suddenly all these young adults going no contact with their parents? And I think there's a number of kind of factors playing into it that I'm exploring. One being this notion of what I'm calling social hygiene, the idea that that ideas can be bad, but the idea actually makes the person bad and sort of toxic, like a vector for bad ideas. And so we want to kind of scrub clean our social circles of any potential vector for some viral bad idea.
Hmm.
I think that's one sort of concept that we've sort of absorbed, particularly in the younger generations. Another one is demythologizing the family, which is nothing new. There's been efforts to demythologize family life for a long time. Family is a powerful way of being learning how to be human and also learning who God is, and so it's always going to be a target of sort of aggressive secular ideologies. Another one is broadening concepts of trauma, which I'm sure you've thought a lot about and know much about, but we really have expanded that concept in ways that I think have done a great disservice to the stability of our sort of mental health. Um, Another one is an infallibility narrative. So we have this tendency to think the person who has been wounded is impeachable. Or unimpeachable, excuse me.
Hmm.
You can't scrutinize the reason. You have to just assume this is the last resort. This is the only decision left to them. They were in pain, and so the person who's been cut off is left to be scrutinized in every which way. And the person who chose to do the cutting off, you cannot is unassailable.
Hmm.
And I think that that has also been a disservice to all of us because we oftentimes need course correction. We need someone to give us a perspective on our own decisions that we don't or aren't aware of, and we need to be checked. And sometimes we can be lost in the sea of hurt and not know that we're taking a step that actually not only is harmful to this other person but harmful to myself, particularly when we need the buffer of family life to kind of be a balm when we're in times of crisis, and to kind of disregard that and jettison it too casually is really a bad sign, not only for our family, but also for society at large. If we can't put up with differences in our family, how are we going to do that in our communities and in our neighbors and in our country? um,
Sure.
so,
I'm
and then a
curious
final one. Oh, sorry.
if sorry, if you're I know there's different phases of research for projects. If have you started getting into any of the statistics yet? Any interesting statistics about people that have, like, how many kids are estranged, how many,
Yeah. So
where is this showing up?
estrangement overall in the United States in particular is about one and let's see, sorry, I think it's right just over 1 out of 4 people are estranged from some member of their family. Now, that does not necessarily mean the political estrangement or politicized estrangement that I'm talking about. That can be because of abuse, mental health, addiction, what have you. But it's a sharp rise, and I don't have the in my memory what the shift has
That's
been.
okay. I totally put you on the spot there.
It's okay. That's okay. I'm terrible at remembering statistics, and my mind isn't great with them. So I really have to kind of make sure I'm sitting down and absorbing them. But
No, the reason I ask is, again, that clickbaity thing. It's like, it's all the ideas that you just communicated are so powerful. And I don't think most parents are thinking about those ideas when they're wrestling with the sort of limit and boundary of taking their kid's phone away, or how to separate them from these social media and social networks and social sort of false communities. And I think if parents understood what's at risk, they would be empowered to step in much earlier, like you said, an ounce of prevention. And that is what I see to be such a dire piece of this puzzle right now. And the things we're experiencing are really consequences of decisions that have been made even 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we don't realize how much the way we think is shaped by philosophies and thinkers that we've never even read.
Yes.
It's fascinating how used to. I mean, even the idea of expressive individualism and the therapeutic self. That these are really new ways of looking at the human person that are radically different than how our grandparents grew up or what have you. I love that quote from G.K. Chesterton. We don't. The Catholic Church helps us to not be a slave to our time, and whether or not you're Catholic, the point being that how do we think about the way that we're all thinking and step outside of it and try to kind of evaluate it so that we're not passively going along downstream with the current of ideology without realizing it.
Yes, exactly. So then we have this ideology that was just seething and percolating and developing under the surface. And then, Jonathan Haidt points out 2014 as this sort of shift in culture when all the kids now are on the phones, and all that was necessary was this vehicle. And you have this sort of developmental phase. A psychodevelopmental perspective could easily make sense of the normal developmental phase where you're sort of understanding your self individuation, where you're testing your identity, you're you're reacting against the family of origin, you're going out to the community around you to see what other perspectives are out there. Well, you add you add the remote connection to these false communities that emerged based around these superficial identities, and all of a sudden it's like pouring all this fuel onto this explosive fire for separation. And so, normally you'd go through that phase of separation from your family of origin, and it's like, okay, then it's like your neighborhood. It's the other people in my neighborhood, or maybe the people at maybe college even. Oh, wow. Like, goodness, college, all the diversity of perspective at college. But you're still close enough to like normal humanity
Yeah.
that's couched within and protected within reason. And until we've now isolated out these individual anomalies of a human experience and created a community around an anomaly, like cross-dressing, and all of a sudden now that's your whole community that you're being formed by, and it's polarizing even further the separation from any normalcy in community. And that's what we essentially opened the floodgates to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to see the foregone conclusion of that process, which is, why would anybody stay in contact with these other parts of their real community? Because they've been fed and flooded with this other trajectory.
Yeah, I think that's right. And it's sort of like you're creating a community just with yourself, right? Because when you're disembodied in your relationships, you can sort of project onto those other people what you want to project onto them. You sort of kind of fill in the blanks because you don't have the embodied
Yes.
reality of the awkwardness and the tones and the signs and the facial expressions and the body language. And so you can sort of just imagine, you imagine all of those things. And so really you're having a relationship with this idea, but it's kind of an idea you're projecting onto someone that's really not real. I remember the first time I started noticing that what you're referencing, it was about 2014, that a lot of teenagers were no longer eager to get their driver's license. And I
Yes.
started talking to friends, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, my kids, they're not going to get it. They'll get it when they're 18 or something." And I thought I was at the DMV on my 16th birthday because I was trying to
Definitely.
have an embodied freedom, to be with other people. And I realized, like, oh gosh, these kids are just on their phones. They're not driven to go be with each other.
I feel like that's probably one of those litmus tests. If you want a quick and easy way to find out like how well your kid is doing,
Yeah.
like I don't know. My oldest is 12, so I'm not in a in this phase yet. So I don't want to shoot myself in the foot here. And I don't mean to put any parents on blast who maybe are dealing with this situation, but it seems like your kids should want to get a driver's license.
Yes.
And if they're just totally fine,
Yeah.
just sitting in their room and not engaging on that level,
I think it's a
maybe there's
metric. Yeah, it's a
it
metric.
is. It sounds like it, right?
Yeah.
How old are your kids?
25 down to 13. So we've got four who have gone through the driver's license, and they all were trying to get it at least trying to get it at 16. A couple of them had to take the test several times, but at least they all were eager to get it. So that's good.
Okay. All right, good. Well, I'll check in with you in a couple years and make
Yeah.
sure that we're
See how
still on
that
the right
12-year-old.
track.
You should start planting little seeds. It won't it be so great when you're driving?
Oh, they definitely have shown signs already. They already want to take the lawnmower down the road. They're
Yeah.
they're ready to get out of here. But yeah, I think that's right, that we can track that and see that progression. And so, I think if well, yeah, what are you seeing in terms of research in what people are trying to do about this, or is there any are we still trying to make sense of what's happening, or are we at the point of corrective measures? Where are we?
I think that we are just now starting to grapple with it. It's been interesting because when I talk to people about it, either they understand immediately and they've have this experience, which a lot of people do, or they are just very unaware of it. I think because as a society, we've not really um, recognized, okay, this is a problem. Sometimes it just takes us all recognizing, okay, we need to address this. And I think we're just starting at that phase with all these articles I referenced, trying to grapple with the no contact movement. But I don't get the sense that they are really reaching down enough to the roots of what's happening. It's more just like, oh, isn't this odd that this is happening? And maybe we should push the brakes a little bit on this. But I think we really have to understand what's driving it in order to be able to overcome it deeply enough. And so, that's why I want to write the book. And I'm only, a few chapters in. So maybe I'll come back on in a year or so and then I'll have a lot more to say. But um, I find it to be totally fascinating. And, you know, it, it's interesting to also thinking about in the context of the loneliness epidemic.
Hmm.
That's not a new thing, but I think this plays into it in a new way. And it's sort of also similar to, I mean, what's been happening in, K through 12 also. I mean, you see with the social emotional learning programs, I did some research on some of those curriculums, and there really is an effort, it seems like, to I'm sure unintentionally for most of the people who are implementing these programs, but at some level, there's some way in which there's a wedge being placed between children and their parents, in particular, at young ages. There's this one exercise in the one curriculum where they keep like a problem diary and they were given prompts. What have been your problems today? And one is, were your parents not there for you in an important moment? Who treated you unfairly today? Did someone make you feel left out today? And I realized, I thought, gosh, these are like the opposite questions that any of us ask our kids at the dinner table, which would be things like, what did you learn? Who did you help? Were you helpful to
Right.
your family? Did you include the new kid in class into lunch with
Right.
you? Putting the responsibility on them. And instead, they're doing what I call a inverse examination of conscience, where you're examining everyone else's conscience. Who
Yes.
failed me today?
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it makes you, it does two things, I think. It makes you identify your moral stature as one of victimhood, and it also makes you have to maintain that moral stature through a process of accusation.
Well, and it also, it's like psychologically, it's so unhealthy. I love, what Abigail Schreier pointed out with these programs, and I mean, really, two different psychological principles. One of locus of control. So you have this externalized locus versus internalized locus, where it's like we already know that it's super unhealthy to continue this narrative and maintain this mindset that what's happening outside of us is more important than what we're actually capable of and responsible for internally. And then just the focus on the moods themselves,
Yeah.
that there's a negative bias. There's a negative cognitive bias, which, all things being equal, the more we focus on things that are problems, it's going to start to sway the general shift towards the negative.
That's right.
So it's a really important thing. That's what I'm curious about. So like using SEL as an example. So like with Abigail Schreier's book and sort of an awakened realization of some of these ideological flaws in this programming and what's been accepted and allowed, especially by the mental health field. Is there any sense of caution or uh, any sense of a need for correction in the articles you're reading from this sort of popular reporting on the no contact movement?
Yeah, I sense that most of these writers are saying, hey, we should be cautious here. This might not be helpful. And I think there's a real trepidation, though. And I mean, because of one of those currents being, you cannot question the person in pain. So they almost seem like a bit nervous as they're writing this. Like, is it okay to give a little pushback here? Should we be cautious and careful? And um, so, and the interesting thing is just thinking about what you were just saying about, examining our feelings too much. I had some of my girlfriends too. There was a test from one of the kind of someone who's built a big niche in the internet of encouraging kids to explore, or adults to explore their childhood wounds and go no contact and draw boundaries when needed. And there's this quiz you can take, like 6 or 7 questions about your childhood to examine what level of toxicity you had in your family life. And the questions are broad enough that, I thought every one of these questions I could give like a 1 or a 3, depending
Oh,
on how I interpret them. I had a bunch of my girlfriends do it too. And it was interesting because some of them scored fairly high on the toxicity level. You had a lot of toxicity. I recommend therapy. I recommend this. I recommend that. Buying his program, of course, for $65, whatever it was. But one of them said in particular, her parents had some substance issues and there was just some neglect, and so she rated fairly high. And she just said, "I'm just so happy in my adult life, my marriage, my family. I've got so much purpose that I just don't really need to have that all be like re-examined and uh, I don't like the idea of going therapy now. My parents and I have a fine relationship. And I think so much of the healing process can come in finding purpose, right, in your adult life. And so my heart, I really feel for a lot of these young adults who are cutting off their parents, because I think there's some pain that they have. They've been
yeah.
taught and trained, as we've been talking about, to examine their emotions ad nauseum, to look for ways that they can claim injury. And that is, really corrosive on your ability to mature and to feel peaceful and, mentally stable. And so I'm not even sure what level of culpability there is at this point when they've been trained so deeply into this ideology that is so unhealthy. And then they may have real wounds from their childhood that, are were no child should have experienced. Um, but then I think about, if they can find some way to flourish now, that can be a piece of the healing. A big piece of the healing is finding your purpose now, not, being drawn to kind of marinate on the past in this way.
Yes, 100%. I think the more healing we actually do, the less we need to separate from people around us.
Yeah.
And of course, I say that confidently, without that trepidation, but also recognizing, of course, there are real situations that happen where people are abused. There is significant trauma, and that's not victim shaming to make the statement I just made. It just means, yeah, most of us, actually, all of us are in this human condition state, and we're all going to have wounds, and we all have imperfections. We've all been raised with imperfections. We are raising our kids with imperfections. I'm sorry if that's news, but I have to share with you that expert opinion from one parent to another and to every other parent listening. We are actually wounding our children.
Yeah.
That's a reality. That's why we believe that we all need Christ.
Yeah.
Like, that's what it fully means to be integrated in our Christianity. It's like too often we say on one side of our, speaking out of one side, we say, well, we're all in need of a savior, but then on the other side, it's like we're totally resistant to recognizing the ways that we're actually wounded or wounding
Hmm.
other people.
Yeah.
Like, they both go hand in hand. One is because of the other. So we need to actually recognize that reality and not be afraid to have these conversations. And okay, so if we are all wounding and being wounded, that means the solution to the appropriate and reasonable expectation for healing that can happen in this life cannot necessitate the ending of and separating from most of the important relationships in our life.
Yeah.
It's the opposite conclusion. If you have to be in no contact, there's such an egregious, violent rupture that the only possibility is to actually go against what's at their deepest core of our human nature, to be in communion with each other. And that's a tragedy and a travesty when that happens. And it does happen,
Hmm.
but it certainly can't be the norm.
Right. Right. Yeah. And yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it does seem like you're hitting on something I think really important, which is, grace. Every relationship requires grace being extended back and forth. And the idea that one of the refrains I hear a lot in no contact circles is, "I don't owe my parents anything."
Mm,
That this is what they'll say over and over. They were the parent. I was the child. They needed to. The love was directed towards me. It ought to have been,
mm,
and they're speaking to something that has an air of truth about it. Certainly, the parent bears more responsibility. They're the adult. They're the parent. The child is a child. But there is also is something called honor your father and mother. What I mean? That this is like from all of history, we've understood that there is a certain respect and reverence due to our parents. And the idea that we're utterly going against that now, I think is sort of, well, it goes along with that sort of infallibility narrative that the grace is only extended one way. And that we don't really need to see our parents as human beings who are fallible and have their own weaknesses, and that not as we want grace extended to us, we should be extending it back to them.
right.
That it's only one directional. And one thing you lose in that process is any felt need for a savior. If I don't have to examine myself and my own need to kind of extend grace and receive grace, I don't know why I need a savior.
Yes.
So it's corrosive not only to our relationships but to our spirit, our divine intimacy and our spiritual affiliation.
Yes, 100%. And I think that, are you familiar with parts theory, with internal family systems and parts theory?
I don't think so.
As a psychological intervention, it's kind of a new contemporary
Oh,
theoretical orientation, and it's the what the movie Inside Out was built off of. They had an internal family systems consultant for the movie Inside Out, the
wow.
Disney
Oh,
movie.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So the little girl Riley, she had this set of characters in her head, and they were sort of part of what she made decisions and acted out of.
Okay.
And so, we've gone very far in, I think, what is an appropriate a deepening of our understanding of ourself, and recognizing that there are parts of us internally that are formed or emerge out of our childhood.
Mhm.
And so there's also like healing the inner child, and
Mhm.
there's like this idea of inner child work. And it's really good. It's really profound. It's really, and I think really God-given providential development of a sense of our anthropology and our sense of self. But we end up going too far, and we've sort of swung the pendulum too far, where we forget that we're actually also an adult person.
Mhm.
So, if you see a parent talking to a 4-year-old and stopping, basically acting as if the 4-year-old exists for the parents' sake, for
Yeah.
their, and they're looking to take more from their 4-year-old than what they're giving, and the parent says, well, my 4-year-old's supposed to follow the fourth commandment. What about honor your father? You'd look at this person like they had 5 heads. It'd be like, what? what what mythological creature are you? But when that 4-year-old becomes 24, and it's like, okay, yeah, maybe that happened. Maybe that truly is part of your history, but that doesn't mean that you're still supposed to act like a 4-year-old or be involved in that relationship as a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
So we have to hold this complexity of saying, well, maybe there's pain that goes back to when you were 4. Maybe you should be in therapy. Maybe there's a lot of work to be done there to heal that wound. At the same time as recognizing that today at 24, you're actually in a relationship as an adult with a parent who, by the way, suffered all their own wounds from their parents, had no idea really the full depth of what they were even doing. And so that's the whole point. And I love what you said, that it takes us all away from the reality that we need a savior, because we're supposed to all remain as children
Mm.
with God, the Father.
Yeah.
We're not supposed to remain as children with our biological or worldly parents. And so that's this like profound complexity. And if we're still acting towards our parents as if we are children in that manner, it's almost like we're saying we're not going to step into that new world of having God as a father. We're still operating in this relational dynamic with parents as if they're supposed to be our creator and sustainer of our life. And so it's like, yeah, we have to pick. Like, are we ready to transcend that relationship to go deeper into a child relationship with God the Father? Or are we remaining stunted in our growth and clinging to these worldly images of what the real creator looks like?
I think that's so right. And I love what you said when you said, and when we're 24, looking back on our parents who maybe mistreated us when we were 4, and that parent was reacting to their own, wounds. And just going to follow along through intergenerational determinacy unless someone breaks it,
Yes.
because then now the 24-year-old, then are they now justified to go treat their future 4-year-old in the way they were treated? At what point do we say, okay, I can recognize that this happened and this is true, and that I might validly need to examine this and kind of peel back whatever the layers are and try to, but for the sake of real healing, not for the sake of perpetuating something. And that, I think that part of that healing comes with not only sort of choosing something different for yourself, but also choosing to see that parent in a new light too, and give them sort of the opportunity. I mean, I've talked to so many people who, they were close to cutting off a parent. They persevered and stayed in that relationship. And now, their parents elderly and, they're helping them, in their old age, and they don't have feel those wounds anymore. And they've been able to kind of heal, and they've developed their own life and found their flourishing elsewhere and don't rely on it all from that parent, and discover, have a relationship with God and transferred sort of that child, like you're saying, that childlikeness towards a relationship with him rather than the parent that wounded them. And they're so great. Looking back, they'll say, I'm glad I have opportunity to be helpful to this person now, even though, I really was angry and I really was had legitimate grievances. Now, obviously, I think there are some people who go no contact and it's necessary. So I'm not saying every person who goes no contact is missing out on this opportunity and they made the wrong decision. I
Right.
think there are real valid reasons to do it. But we tend to veer onto one extreme or the other, and it seems to me that we've veered onto this one, um, and needs some course correction.
Yeah, and I think probably just the emergence of this as a fad or a
Yeah.
trend speaks to a disproportionate application of a psychological principle that's probably really healthy in many cases. And so, what I find often in the work that we're doing is there are seasons of time
Mm.
when, okay, somebody's working on some of those childhood wounds. It happens to be coming up to Christmas. And then the question comes up like, okay, this is what mom tells me I have to do every Christmas. We have to get our kids on the plane. We have to fly out there. Otherwise, she guilt trips me for 2 months afterwards. And what do I do this time? It's like, well, this is the work you're doing right now. And at that point, maybe there is actually a boundary that gets set
Mm.
where it's like, hey, you know what? How about this Christmas you come visit us instead? Or I think this Christmas we're going to lay low.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, the modified no contact idea is reasonable and has context and is also meaningful for a purpose.
Yeah.
Whereas it's not this end all be all with this, sort of gross generalization of a definition. And if that can be really healthy, even if it's not, quote unquote abuse in the most outward way, but we're okay, there's nuance there. But then all of a sudden you have a trend and it has a label and it's being written up by major, magazines and news outlets. Like, okay, I think we're probably shifting in a direction that's creating more problems than it's solving.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you can kind of see that we've been living with this idea for a while. I mean, I was just looking back at, old campaigns and well, Obama administration did this and Biden administration did this too, where they had sort of cheeky, the pajama boy, where he'd say, when you go home for Christmas, drink hot chocolate, wear pajamas, and talk about healthcare. And then there was another campaign that happened about, fighting with your family over Thanksgiving dinner and how, you better use this Thanksgiving dinner to correct that terrible uncle or whatever. This has been part of our popular imagination for a while. And I think it seems sort of like these quirky kind of cringy one-off whatever, but I think they were more significant, that even at that level, sort of in the popular zeitgeist, we've been introducing this idea that our families are probably super toxic, even
Mm.
because of the things that they believe, because they're on the wrong side. And I think this is really, there's a lot of deeper things happening, but I think there's also just broad cultural ways that we talk about this that are not healthy and not helpful.
Yeah, that's really deep. I mean, that's insidious, and also you can, yeah, just see those ideologies, those 100-year-old ideologies that most people don't even think about seeping in. I didn't think about that just that sense of the family being toxic and as the butt of all jokes, and the sort of expectation, the underlying assumption that this is what we're all dealing with,
Yeah.
juxtaposed to, and I hate to say it, but a lot of, non-white American cultures that are, very deeply embedded with family,
Yeah.
and family is everything. A lot of the Hispanic cultures, a lot of all different cultures that are so, I've been doing a lot of research with Native American culture, and some of the things that go into the history of our country even, but what we miss out on from a lot of the indigenous perspective of family
Yeah.
and connection and ancestry, but that in the real life, real time experience means there's a longing to be connected and to receive the wisdom of the elders and to take responsibility for raising of the younger children, and it's so human,
Yeah.
and we've become so dehumanized.
Yeah, I think that might be a reflection of some decadence, right? That when we sort of our lives are
Mm,
kind of we're inured from the real sufferings and tragedies and crises of the life temporarily, or it seems that we are, even though it's always an illusion, of course. That we can sort of make politics and take on a space that it ought not to take, where it can be all encompassing, and we can sort of hang on to all these ideas that trump sort of our family relationships or triumph over them.
mm,
And I think when you are kind of closer to hardship or suffering, um, that you know the strength and the importance of that family bond, and you know that
mm,
those people have been there for me, and my darkest moments maybe. And so all of a sudden, you're not going to reduce the other person to a position or to something you see on a political campaign or something. You're going to say this is a human being who has his or her own struggles, triumphs, joys, sufferings, friendships, relationships, jobs. There's so much more to the human person than politics, and so you don't really have the you can't really afford to kind of reduce people in that way when you understand them so much more deeply.
yeah, wow. So practically speaking, we got to reconnect people, stop them from disconnecting.
Yeah.
And where do you see this going in terms of what we can do about it?
Yeah. Well, the nice thing is that I think that there is a sort of people are kind of sick of, a lot of ideology, that in some ways things that are based on lies about the nature of the human person are only perpetuated through certain types of manipulation. Through, I see it as tending to be through appeals to pity and then to fear and then to force. And
Mm,
I think it tends to move in that progression. Um, and the first one, I think misplaced compassion or, weaponized compassion tends to be the broadest. But once people see through it and see it as manipulation, it really loses a lot of its power. It's sort of like someone coming out of, and I don't want to overuse therapeutic language because I know this is a problem now, but it's sort of someone coming out of like a narcissistic relationship. I have
Mm,
only experienced that once with a friend, walking through it with a friend. But it was so remarkable once she understood all of these things that she thought were love were manipulations. She no longer was susceptible to them. And I think that there's something akin to that with ideology. And so I think that we're experiencing a time where people are more aware of that type of thing. And of course, we don't want it to make us hardened people. Obviously there are true calls to compassion that are right and righteous, and that we need to be. We can't write everything off as you're manipulating me. That's not my point. My point is that we need to think more deeply about these things, and I think that people are ready to start on that road. So a lot of it is just, I think, spotting it. Um,
mm.
there's I think people are searching a new way for answers that are, you know, I think people are searching for Christ in a new way. I think we see a lot of people coming to him, that, kind of the old kind of propaganda that family and faith are oppressive and boring and just a bunch of no's and, all these things. I think people are that's sort of lost its compelling nature, that sort of lie, and people
Mm,
are searching for it, in a new way. So I think that's really hopeful. And the more that we do that, I think, then we tend to become people who are willing to take feedback from others, or willing to kind of question our own perceptions, and, try to, get mentorship, or try to mentor other people, or, what have you. And those types of relationship building, we're creating models for, how to think about ourselves, how to think about our relationships. I think that's really important, to have
mm.
those sorts of, intergenerational or just friendships, with people who we see as wiser than we are. Those types of things are really helpful, I think, in kind of breaking through all of this
Yes,
toxicity.
amen. Yeah, and I think the more that we do our part for educating the culture in different ways, the more people become aware of these different dynamics, and then sort of savvy to the process,
Yeah,
where parents in their communities, in their church community, in their home communities can look out for signs of certain things, have empowered motivation to take the phones away from their kids,
yeah,
be able to talk more about almost ostracizing the, these insidious dynamics themselves. Wait, when somebody starts counseling no contact, they become ostracized. That should become
mm,
the new sort of cancel culture.
yeah,
It's like let's cancel these dehumanizing,
mm,
real dehumanizing trends. And uh, suffice to say, I think your work has been profound and tremendous in helping to develop that awareness for people to sort of think about these things from a higher level. So really appreciate your efforts, and as in this area, I love that this book is forthcoming, and we're going to be praying for your efforts there, to try to get out, and definitely we'll have you back on when it's ready. And I
thank
think
you.
this is, yeah, this is like a really current manifestation of a lot of the same things that we've been seeing and talking about for a while, but it takes new forms. It's like the evil one, right? It's like it's just going to keep coming back with every different kind of manifestation. Every time we squash one, it's going to pop back up, and we just have to keep doing the work.
That's right. It reinvents itself, which is why it's so important to sort of see the patterns. Yeah, as you were saying. So, yeah. Well, I will probably need to offline interview you at some point for the book, because I love what you're doing, the Catholic Psych Network, and you're such a perfect example of looking at, the power that all of this can have, in a good way and a bad way, and trying to be helpful, really helpful to people, to help them achieve, more flourishing in their life. So, thank you for all
I
you're
would
doing.
love that. That would be great. So where would you like people to find you? Where can people find you best?
Theologyofhome.com is the website I run with Carrie Gress. And then I'm also a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. So I've got a scholar page over there, if
Okay,
people want to
wonderful.
connect.
And then you have Awake Not Woke and Theology of Home on Amazon, or at your
Yeah,
website there.
they're on anywhere you can buy books. And also we sell them at
Yep.
Theology of Home.
Yep. And then your new book, tentatively titled.
No contact.
Okay, so we'll
Yeah.
see if that remains the title.
Yeah.
But we'll,
That won't
we'll
be out till
definitely have you back.
2026, but yeah, I'm working on it now.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much again for being here. God
Thanks,
bless all
Greg.
you and your
Great to
work.
be with you.
Thanks for listening to the Being Human podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode and want to help us spread the word and hear more, please head over to iTunes, leave us a review, and subscribe, as it really helps us to get our content out to more people. Be sure to listen next time as I take you deeper into what it means to be human. If you want more free content and information about what we do at the Catholic Psych Institute, head on over to CatholicPsych.com. God bless you.